Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Andy Smallbone. I'm an associate professor at Durham, and this event is organised through the EPSRC Network Plus for the decarbonisation of heating and cooling, and is part of a series looking at the different challenges of decarbonising heating and cooling across various sectors and across different behaviours. This week, we're welcoming three speakers on the subject of ground source and smart local energy systems who will provide their own thoughts from an academic and an industry perspective. We're going to now move over to Dr. Matt Trewhella. He'll be talking about ground source heat pump innovation. He's from Kensa Group. And as a former NASA scientist, Matt joined Kensa in 2013 and has overseen the development of Kensa's contracting's large-scale delivery operations and has helped pioneer the use of shared ground loop systems prior to his appointment as managing director. We should be able to hear you, and if you can tell us all about ground source heat pump innovation, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you said at the beginning, we're going to look at the past, present, and future of ground source and the innovation work we're doing. Could easily spend an hour on each of those topics, probably a whole day on the last one, the future, but we'll try and just give you a flavour so we can get on to the questions. When I say the future, it's one possible version of the future, and it's a few of our ideas for basically addressing all the things that Jeff and Madeline have just taken us through in terms of policy and deployment. So hopefully keep the things that they were talking about in mind as we look at that. So first of all, yes, I originally an academic and worked at NASA. My field was astrophysics, and if you've worked in astronomy and astrophysics, thinking about climate change is second nature. If you compare, the temperatures of Earth and Mars, for instance, they come out a little bit weird if you just look at how far away they are from the sun and their size. And if you factor in CO2, then it all starts making sense. And the same for Venus and Mercury as well. So yeah, in the late 1990s, when I started getting interested in climate change, I was really quite surprised to find that not a lot of people believed it or thought about it. So, it seemed obvious to me. And what we've seen in the last 20 years since then has basically just proved the point, with well over 1 degree rise and CO2 levels rising. Kensa split into three parts. The oldest part, formed in 1999, is Kensa heat pumps, and we manufacture heat pumps at our factory in Cornwall near Truro, and it's the only UK manufacturer of ground source heat pumps. The bit that I've been looking after is Kensa contracting, and we do ground source anytime you can do a lot in one place. And then Kensa Utilities is fairly newly formed with a view to setting up and moving towards the future that we're going to talk about. So fund, own and operate larger systems. So very quickly on the basics, ground source heat pumps move a very large amount of low-grade energy from the ground into a heat exchanger. That then warms up a refrigerant gas, which is compressed. It gets very hot, and it distributes its heat into another heat exchanger, which then pumps water off around your heating system or hot water. And then the gas is allowed to expand again, which it cools. So the gas just goes round and round. Typically, it's antifreeze going round and round the ground, and heating water going round and round your heating. So three separate, independent but linked circuits. And the most important thing to remember is that it's nothing being burnt here to produce the heat. The efficiency of the system is very high. The electrical energy used to drive it is much less than the heat you get out. And what that actually means is most of the energy in your heating system is actually coming from the ground. So just as Jeff was saying, energy is generated locally. That's very, very literal in the sense of ground source is literally generated from the ground outside your house. Typically 3/4 of the heat coming through your radiators will have come from the ground, and about 1/4 of it will come from the electricity. That's what it looks like. I'm calling it the past. Actually, that's not quite true. We still do quite a lot of these at Kensa. About 20% of our work looks exactly like this, where you have one house, one ground array, and one heat pump. And that's traditionally been self-build. Rural areas, people think of you need lots of space for ground source. I have to say, if you speak to government, which I do quite often, and you say ground source heat pump, this is exactly what they're picturing. Like I say, that we're already at the situation where that's only around 20% of what we do at Kensa. What we do a lot more of is something called a shared ground array. So you've got, in this case, I've shown some boreholes, but it could be horizontal pipes, but mostly boreholes. And you have a number of boreholes and a number of properties, and they're all shared together. In practical terms, it's much more like the gas grid. You've got some pipes in the ground delivering low-grade energy to your building. In gas, it's low-grade chemical energy. In this case, it's a low-grade heat. And then you have a white box in your house that you own that converts and upgrades that heat into usable energy for heating and hot water. You get loads of benefits doing it this way, not least if you were going to do a row of 10 houses, kind of 6 of them would be average, 2 of them would use loads of heat, and 2 of them would be quite frugal. If you were designing one ground array for each property, then they'd all have to assume that they're the high heat users, whereas if you share it, then you can design to the average. The amount of ground you need to access is lower, and then you can also play other tricks like drilling deeper boreholes and fewer of them. It's much cheaper to drill a borehole to 250 meters than it is 5 to 50 meters. So we're already accessing economies of scale. This is what it looks like in tower blocks, as you say, a series of boreholes connected to heat pumps. One little bit of innovation, well, it's coming on for 8, 9, maybe even 10 years old now. Kensa is a shoebox, which is basically a very tiny heat pump that's small enough and quiet enough to fit in an airing cupboard of a flat. In this case, that's some flats in Sunderland, so a little bit up the road from you guys in Durham, and heat pumps here where the old gas meter used to be, and there's a hot water storage, that's a sun amp there, where the old gas boiler used to be. So very simple system. Loads more about our how this works on our website if you want to follow up, but that's what we call it. It's called a shared ground array, or sometimes called an ambient temperature heat network. And that's what it looks like if you scale that up to city scales. At the moment, nearly all of our work with shared ground arrays is in 2 main market areas. The first is new build. Yeah, clearly, if you're building 100 homes, you can put this infrastructure in at the beginning, and all of those homes need to convert at the same time, which is crucial. Very difficult to do a shared system, one property by one property at the moment, or it's in social housing for a retrofit. So if you own the whole street already, or if you own a tower block or a series of tower blocks next to each other, then you can do this quite well. Interestingly, where we're moving is to be more than just a shared ground array. So if you've got a network of pipework carrying fluid at around 10 to 12 degrees, then there's loads of things you can cool down using that fluid. There's an example there, from underground data centers. I'm always shocked to find out just how much energy data centers use. We're working on one project in London where the heat coming off the data center could provide heating and hot water for 15,000 flats. So that gives you an idea of scale. I'm really interested in cooling down PV panels. PV panels generate more electricity when they're cold, and that heat coming off the back of them can be put into the ground array to reduce the amount of electricity that the heat pumps use. So I've left a couple of links there. I think the slides are going to be shared afterwards, so you can find out a little bit more about what we're doing in there. We're already doing this in dense urban areas and in high-rise, like 13-story tower blocks and things like that. As we look into the future and we start thinking about the wider retrofit, it's quite difficult to persuade a street of 100 or 200 or 500 properties to all decarbonize their heating at the same time. So once we move into the gas network, and as Jeff and Maddie were saying, towards the end of the 2020s, this is going to be necessary. We think something called a split ownership is going to be one of the keys to unlocking this. And the idea here is that the bit outside the home, all of the infrastructure, is deployed as a utility in exactly the same way as the gas boiler was put in originally, the gas networks. So in the sort of 20s and 30s, towns were putting in small networks and people were connecting their homes to them for lighting. the 60s and 70s, with the introduction of North Sea gas, those networks were extended and connected together nationally, and people started converting gas boilers and using it for heating and hot water. So that didn't happen. You didn't get all of the people in the same street connecting on the same day, and the network was put in, and then people connected over a period of time. We think that's the exact same for decarbonising heat now. At the moment, if you lived in a terraced house in a city and you decided that you wanted to decarbonise, let's say your gas boiler had broken down, you're probably going to phone up and you're going to want a gas boiler there within a day or two, and your heating and hot water back on. If you wanted to go green at that point with ground source, actually that's not going to be very practical for you, because you've got to have someone assess the ground, assess the house, loads of design, and then you've got to book in potentially drilling rigs, and it all just takes a lot of time. If the infrastructure is in the street with 2 pipes at your front gate, then all you need to do is take those 2 pipes in, buy a heat pump, and connect them up, and you can be pretty much up and running. It helps address the skills gap, because in the same way we don't ask gas boiler installers now to design and install the gas grid. Most of them, I've met quite a few, wouldn't have a clue how that works. All they do is fit their boiler, check they're getting the right pressure, check they're getting the right flow rates, and that's it. They don't really have to worry about what happens in the street. And we could do the same here. So it kind of de-skills it in the sense that it splits out the skills into specialists. So someone like Kensa Contracting could come on and put the infrastructure in, and gas boiler installers could probably learn how to convert to fitting this type of heat pump, which we're actually calling networked heat pumps to distinguish from the traditional ground source, in a day or two, of course. So all they really would have to learn is slightly different way of sizing radiators and a slightly different commissioning system. It's still just 2 pipes coming in to the building and 2 pipes going off to the heating system and hot water. So very, very quick training. And then we think the utility here would take a payment from the homeowners to recoup their investment, very much like the standing charge you pay for your gas network access now. So again, that helps spread that funding out. Instead of homeowners paying for 100 years worth of energy supply, which is what you get from a ground array, in one go, they could actually just pay a monthly fee for access to that. So that's splitting it out. And we think it's relatively straightforward to then fund and finance the internal house stuff. That's very much like funding a kitchen or a new windows or any other home improvement. So splitting out the funding mechanism, we think, is going to be a key to getting this on a large scale. So we're trying some of this at the moment in a Innovate UK sponsored project, which is Energy Revver taking part of that, which is how we know the network and work with it. And we're putting in a shared ground array system. Here's a snapshot, so you can see these are 2-story flats along here, and you can see here's the boreholes. They're connected together, and then these are shared out amongst these flats. Here's another separate ground array here. And we're using smart controls here, so addressing another of the elements. So as the guys were talking about, grid balancing and moving energy around, synchronizing the electricity of the heat pumps with the availability, both nationally in terms of generation and locally in terms of the strain on the local network, is going to be key. I couldn't agree with that more. It's totally at the heart of what we do. So this project has a smart thermostat embedded in it, and we're actually trying that already. How we're doing it, we're optimizing on price. So here's a snapshot of a average year's price spread from midnight to midnight on a typical day. So you can see the prices varying all through the day, and you really wouldn't want to be using electricity at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Most of us pay a flat rate. I believe these are a couple of years old, so probably just triple everything now, considering what's happened in the last 2 years. But most of us at this time, we're paying a flat rate of around 18p, but that's actually made up of a variable rate. So Octopus decided to link this particular experimental tariff to the wholesale price of electricity. And the way it works is I've just taken an example of 4 half-an-hour segments where the heating might be on. here in the morning just before you get up, and here in the evening just before you come home from work. And our system will move the heat pump operation out of those time zones. So it could be from 5 o'clock to 2:30 in the afternoon. And what happens? It all happens in the cloud. So we've got the thermostat in the property that measures the temperature every 5 minutes. We've got a building physics model that learns how long it takes to heat up and cool down the building at various outside temperatures and weathers. We've got how warm the residents like to be and when, and then we've got the electricity price. And our system takes all of that into account and sends a daily new operating profile down to the heat pump. So as the price of electricity and the weather forecast changes each day, we optimize how much of the load can be shifted. And what we're finding actually is you can pretty much avoid the vast majority of this peak. So most buildings can store 2 hours or so worth of heat if you get them. Say someone likes to be 21 degrees, if you take it to 22 or 22 and a half, you don't need to run the heating for a couple of hours at least. So moving from 2 hours of heat from 5 p.m. to 2 p.m. seems to be relatively straightforward without doing anything fancy actually. And that's there we are. We're working on systems that are upcoming that are going to be able to move that 2 to 3 hours worth of heat by 12 to 18 hours, so we can actually access it overnight, or in the future, if you've got forecast a strong wind generation, you can move to those hours when that's happening. And there's a very nice coincidence, though. You can see these two graphs that if you optimize on running costs for the residents, you also optimize on carbon, because expensive electricity is also high carbon, and it's also when the grid's under strain. So if you've solved one of those three things, you go a long way to alleviating all of them. So yeah, extremely fast, but hopefully that gives you a flavor, and we can tease out some of the nuances in the discussion, hopefully.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt.